Good afternoon and welcome to our May Imaging Virtual Pulse, Closing the Gaps Between People, Processes, and Technology. Before we get started, I did want to go over just a couple housekeeping items. If this is your first time joining us since last year, you might notice a new platform. It's a great new user experience with a lot of different tools. But with that, I just want to make sure everybody knows where everything is so they have the best experience. So because this is a web-based platform, there is not a call-in number like we have had in the past. So if you are having issues with the sound, check your speaker settings, go ahead and refresh. If you are having audio issues, clear your cache as well as closing out of any VPNs or extra tabs, because with the bandwidth, sometimes that can affect things. There is a lot more ability to engage with us with some of our tools. You can see in the top left the live stream. If you do need closed caption, that is available for you. We do always encourage questions that we'll get to as many as we can at the end. You can put that in the Q&A box. We also have resources for you. If you was not attend our webinar in February, if you'd like to go back and listen to that, you have that ability to listen in, as well as just some more information on our products and solutions if you're interested in learning more. We always encourage you to complete the survey at the end. We like to know how we did, so if you want to complete the survey at the end, we would really appreciate it. And lastly, if you are interested in learning more, in that middle section, if you click on that, it will take you to a form, and if you are interested in learning more, we'll certainly follow up with you after. Again, questions and answers as much as we can we'll get to at the end, and if you are having any issues, I'll try to do my best to help troubleshoot in the Q&A. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Russ Cardwell, our VP of Imaging Sales, to go over the agenda and get started. So Russ?
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. And yeah, I like this new platform already. So thanks again for the intro. We're going to talk about people, processes, and technology here. I did want to introduce our guest speaker here today, Ken Cortes. He's a principal with TNT Advisors, and before that he was at MarinHealth out in Marin, California, serving as VP of Ancillary Services, and before that Radiology Director, and sometime before that an actual radiology technologist. So he's very much an expert in our field today in radiology. So we thank you, Ken, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to get into this question about how do I determine if I have a people, process, or technology problem? And this is probably especially true as the industry transitions to value-based care, and we continue to feel some of the reimbursement challenges. But before we get into that, I thought if you could just explain, I gave a brief overview of your background, but if you could also kind of share some of your experience throughout all these phases you've seen in healthcare industry, that might be helpful for our audience as well.
Sure. So I started in imaging in 1987. So I thought about that today. That's 35 years next month. That's a pretty long time. And really, I followed my father's footsteps. My father was a tech. He always came home with amazing stories about what he had seen. And, you know, if he'd asked me when I was 16, I probably would have said something like, you know, I'd have been in a general contractor and those kinds of things. But I ended up applying for X-ray school, and it's one of the, you know, really great decisions that I've made. It's been great. I was fortunate enough to start at a small community hospital where everyone wanted to teach. The radiologists, the emergency room doctors, surgeons, et cetera. So I did, you know, got to really understand medicine as a whole, and you know, imaging's role in that. And you know, we play a really big role. You know, we're the team that's finding the answers to the questions regarding patients most times, and that's, you know, it's pretty exciting. You know, nurses get a lot of credit, and they should. But you know, when nursing, you get many times stuck in one kind of discipline. So emergency room nurse or surgical nurse, where imaging touches every age group, every type of patient. So it's been a great ride. And I started, as you mentioned, staff tech, and then a lead tech, then a manager, then a director, executive director, and then finally a VP. So it's
I knew I missed a few titles in there, but I knew you covered the gamut.
Well, it was great, and I worked at a lot of different places all over California, so small and big, and it's just
and I think that's what I wanted the audience to just listen, is that you've covered a lot of different roles, a lot of different organization type settings, and so you do have quite a bit of experience to offer. I'm sure that will come out as we go through our talk today. So maybe we can start with some traditional ways that organizations work through their inefficiencies. Maybe you can share a few examples of some of those traditional ways.
Yeah, I think you hear it all the time. There's lean philosophy, Six Sigma, et cetera. Those kinds of things are the things that almost everyone is using. And we were fortunate to make a couple of good decisions at Marin. We were in a long-term partnership with Philips for not just imaging equipment, but services as well. And so we were able to take advantage of their depth and breadth of their company, one of which is services like lean training. And so Russ Peckinpah, who's the CIO over there, has got a great team in IT, and we wanted to, start to organize the leaders and get them all on the same page. I think early on, one of my prior bosses, understood the impact of lean training, and she brought on an expert, if you will, in lean training. But I think, it didn't really work as well as maybe she'd hoped, because it was just one person. And so, while that person had this great understanding, it was difficult to spread that across the organization. So a couple of good decisions we made. Russ and his team, Scott Panicacci, who's the director of the project management office, and Michelle Barker, director of applications. I think we wanted to use the IT department as to run the PMO department. So that's kind of number one, because in healthcare in particular, you're not doing anything without some sort of technology component. You can talk about things
for sure.
if you want, but I guarantee at some point it has some sort of technology integration. So that's kind of one of the first things we did. And then we brought in Philips to train leaders in lean training, and not just managers and directors, but we brought in a lot of frontline leaders. So these are the people that you're always using for projects in their particular area. They're your subject matter experts, et cetera. So while they don't have the outright leadership title many times, they are the team that's moving that forward. So we wanted to train that whole group with some lean training, and I think we trained 40 or 50 leaders, maybe more, in some lean training to start, so everyone understood, that we have a process, and we started with, using A3s for any sorts of projects. And if you know anything about those, it's, basically a one-page document that has the who, what, why, where, when, and how, all on kind of a concise document. So when we started projects, we started in that way. And then we had many leaders across many disciplines. Now, because many projects, it could be an imaging project, but it touches, the emergency room. It does, physicians have a hand in it as well. So we wanted to make sure that we provided some training, and we took that advantage that we had in that Philips partnership to do that. So we didn't send anybody anywhere. They came to us, which was another thing. And we actually did some, projects accordingly. So.
Very good. Yeah, it sounds like that was very helpful, and obviously getting a wider group of people involved in that training, I'm sure, made the whole organization pivot around that, and I'm sure brought change more quickly and more thoroughly. So, good example there, Ken. On these virtual pulse conversations that we've had over the last, I guess, 5 or 6 quarters, we've kind of weaved in a lot of payment policy and reimbursement impact, and I'm going to, over the time of these questions, we're going to connect some of these traditional ways, Lean and Six Sigma, to try to find improvement. But just to go down this reimbursement path a little bit, we know CMS made its site-neutral payment policy a few years ago with a change reimbursement strategy. Kind of prior to that, many organizations were rapidly acquiring or building outpatient imaging centers to maximize that reimbursement. Then the CMS policy reduced that, essentially reduced that reimbursement for outpatient imaging. So what has been the impact of that reimbursement policy change, and what observations are you seeing now that policy has been in place for a few years?
Yeah, I think, hospitals and hospital groups were obtaining these outpatient imaging centers to increase their footprint, but also I think there was a focus to, several years back to, make sure that when a patient that doesn't need to be in the hospital, there's no reason why someone that, is low acuity, mobile should come into a hospital to have some of these services. So I think, the idea for many institutions was to expand their imaging to the outpatient side. And I think, back then you could charge hospital reimbursement rates and things right before the CMS change that you just mentioned. And I think, it was a good idea at those times, but there's always those kinds of changes happening. CMS, I mean, a similar payment reimbursement reductions occur in outpatient clinical laboratory through something called PALA. And I think, there's always going to be things like that and changes in legislation that are going to make it more difficult to get reimbursed. I think that's just the nature of the business. So,
yep.
Yeah. And
yeah,
I think
so that's,
it just makes people have to focus on being efficient, going back to the lean discussion we were having earlier. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I thought that's where you might take that question was you got to continue to try to work out where the inefficiencies exist to get more efficient.
Yeah, and I think you got to start in the beginning. We did, we built a 10,000 square foot breast center, high risk breast center, and we started that from the beginning. So early on in the planning of that, we brought in, end users to go through and, do spaghetti diagrams on patient flows on that, and you can make changes to your design based on that if you do it early enough. So I think there's a lot of strategy that happens to mitigate things like reimbursement reductions, and I think a big part of that is just becoming more efficient and designing those efficiencies into your projects.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So just to build on that a little bit more, we know that some private payers are now like just only reimbursing at that lower outpatient imaging center rate. So, and I know some of the work you're doing with your consulting business is helping organizations go through building decisions. So, what are some of the key factors organizations should consider in the planning phase as they make this kind of build or acquire decision of imaging centers?
Yeah, I think there's a big strategy component to it. I mean, I think that here in California, a few years back, one of the big providers, Anthem, basically sent out a letter to healthcare organizations and said, we're going to stop paying at all for CTs and MRIs done in hospital outpatient departments. They were not going to pay for CTs and MRIs to be done at the hospital. They had to be done at outpatient imaging centers.
Right.
So, even locally, CMS has made decisions, but even, providers have made those decisions. So I think, for us, a piece of strategy is, being efficient and increasing some volume. So when we did that breast center I was discussing earlier, we were very thoughtful in that because, we had some understanding that, women make the healthcare decisions for their families, or mostly make the healthcare decisions for their families. So while breast centers in and of themselves many times are not a very profitable venture, we knew that we would be increasing our strategy in making sure that women who come for their yearly mammogram and things like that saw us as the place to get all of their health care.
Right.
Men frequently won't see a doctor unless something is really, really long. That could be a year or two, whereas women are much more diligent. And so, I think you have to understand your profitable centers in your organization, and even when you make decisions that are not necessarily increasing your bottom line, bringing patients and volume in other areas to your organization is smart. I think that was one of the good decisions that we've made.
Yeah. So those who are actually going through a building phase and making that decision to actually build a new imaging center these days, I mean, obviously we've been hearing about inflation and building costs, not only cost, but also access to some of these supplies. How has that affected, again, some of the, what you've seen in the market, or if some of them are even organizations you're working with directly?
Yeah, it's been very impactful. I was recently doing a project, an ambulatory surgery center, and I think the total footprint of the center was about 17,000 square feet, and went through the design, test fits, et cetera, and ultimately the company decided not to build the ambulatory surgery center there, but actually size that down and put in a radiation oncology outpatient center in that 17,000 square foot. So this big project was a big ambulatory surgery center. It ended up, servicing 2 service lines because it simply wasn't going to pencil out to be in that space that big. And those are the kinds of things you have to make decisions on, and tough decisions. But supply chain has been rough. So, a big part of doing a center like that is equipment procurement, some of which is architecturally significant, meaning that, as the general contractors and subcontractors are building that center, pieces of equipment that are going to be in that center are, on a timed delivery. And we were seeing things that had a 3-month delivery time going to 2 and 3 times that number. So supplies, the same thing. The price of steel, the price of lumber. I think not only has the price increased on those, but the time to delivery has increased. And, that has been very impactful for anyone trying to build something new.
Yeah, it seems like that would be very difficult to manage and be able to project manage. You mentioned project management earlier in this call, just to kind of deal with those disruptions when you've got expectations of certain time deliveries. So I'm sure that hasn't gotten any easier here. Well, I do want to also ask you about data analytics, because I'm sure that also helps drive some of these decisions on whether you build or acquire. But in recent years, obviously, data analytics have gotten lots of attention for their ability to better manage operational business, but also refine strategy. What are some of the what areas have you seen where analytics help guide decision making in the past, and what kind of tips may you have for our audience about things they might be using analytics for?
Yeah, I think big data is big, and I think what a lot of places struggle with is either data overload or data that's not meaningful. So just piles of data can actually make it more confusing for organizations. So I think the first strategy is to really understand the business that you're in, right? Not every hospital is really in the same business, right? Some are focusing a lot on their specialties, inpatient procedures, et cetera. Others are more focused on outpatient. And, I think that really understanding yourself to understand, how to use some of this data that is out there. And there's, companies that, there's a company that's now called Included Health, but it was called Grand Rounds. And that was a company that was born out of, they would say necessity is the mother of invention, right? Mm-hmm. So it was was started by a Stanford radiologist, interventional radiologist. His son was ill. He had all the resources of Stanford, et cetera, right?
Sure.
It's all at his fingertips. But nobody had the answer about to help his son. And he ends up picking up the phone and calling a physician in Johns Hopkins, something that you and I can't do, right?
Right.
But he, because of where he was.
His access, yeah.
And so he sent over the information. This guy said, your son has A, B, and C. Here's what you need to do. And, this physician, to his credit, said, wow, if it wasn't for who I know, my son may have like a really terrible outcome. And so, this company, at that time, Grand Rounds, they were pulling all that data in. Like the top orthopedic surgeons aren't necessarily doing the most surgeries. The top cardiologists are not always prescribing, specific medications. So I think that, data in and of itself, can sometimes do more harm than good. So really understanding and getting good data for your specific organization is more important.
Absolutely. And obviously filtering through it all, I mean, data for it's by itself doesn't really help you with anything, but the insight from the data is really the valuable part. I know I was, this is probably going back 10, 12 years, but just on basic operational metrics, I knew of a large imaging group along the East Coast who they assessed just the volume of their mammography readers, and they found one that was reading about 1/3 the average of everyone else. And so after talking with them, they found out that they just read slower, but with a higher quality, and they weren't really interested in going faster. And then they kind of worked out an arrangement to make that radiologist still work there, a little bit different rate because everyone else was producing at a higher rate, but it was a mutually acceptable decision. And I think data led to that conversation, and then they got a mutually, agreeable outcome. So I think, I mean, there's just one story, but there's many out there about how data gets.
Similar story. So, again, earlier I mentioned that we were in a long-term partnership with Philips, and one of the things that they did was brought some of their partnership leaders all together with their entire team, from R&D to sales to marketing. They brought their group to listen to these partners on how they should make some changes. And one of them was a large radiology group on the East Coast, and he had great data. And earlier I was discussing one of my kind of favorite topics, which is applications training. And this physician was describing that, he was looking through his data on all of his imaging centers and couldn't figure out why this one MRI was not producing at the level that some of the rest are. And, I kind of coyly said, I think he's about to make the argument that I was describing earlier. And what they ended up finding out was there was one technologist who was just not as comfortable on the equipment. And so, this tech took a little longer to start their scanning, wasn't comfortable with what they were seeing on scouts and things like that. And so, that ended up being the one reason why this one particular MRI scanner was not as profitable as the rest all over the city. And, I think that the way that companies now do, and they're all the same, GE, Philips, Siemens, et cetera, Toshiba, it's applications training is a transaction. You buy $1 million piece of equipment, you get X amount of application trainings with X amount of people. If you want more than that, you have to purchase more and those kinds of things. And I think that's one of when you talk about, processes and technology and things like that, this is one of those areas in imaging that I think we need to really change how we think about applications training, right? With as much turnover as there is, right? What you generally have when you get applications training is you have your subject matter experts, they get most of the training, and then they're doing the teaching kind of going forward for the rest of those things. In 2 years, you can have a lot of turnover. So, all of those people have to be retrained. And now they're being trained by not the maker of this $1 million piece of equipment, by one of your staff. And I think that what healthcare does a lot is does the Army training model. You see one, you do one, and then you teach one. And I think a lot of that is lost. Those $1 million pieces of equipment, $2 million pieces of equipment, only do all of the things that those companies say they can do if the right person is operating a really good, comfortable understanding of that piece of equipment. So, when companies say, our machine does this, it only does it, as I used to say, that it only does it on my least comfortable this experienced technologist on a Sunday at 2 o'clock in the morning. So, I think that's where application training is underserved, and really should. I think the big companies should start thinking about applications not as a transaction, but as a marketing and sales tool for their equipment. When I was down in Southern California, we had one of the first 64-slice spiral CTs on the West Coast from Toshiba, and we were their show site. They brought many prospective customers to see the piece of equipment in action at our hospital, and we were fortunate enough to have a really good technical staff here that really did understand that piece of equipment and used it to all of the capabilities that were advertised. And I think, that I would say that technologist that we had there sold a lot of CT scans for Toshiba at that time because she was so good. And so I think, that process of applications really should change, less of a transaction and more of an ongoing relationship.
Yeah, we've known each other a long time, Ken, and you've been very consistent with that theme that applications training is really paramount, just because of the reason you just said, where the individual operating that piece of equipment becomes, in large part, how successful and how much of that technology can even be used. And I think you've helped touch on one of the three pillars here, which is we talk about how do we improve people, process, and technology. Most organizations will say people is the most important asset, most valuable asset they have. But then again, if we're not enabling them with the right training to operate whatever tools they're supposed to use, then we're not getting the most out of those people, and the organization's not benefiting as much. And in our case, in healthcare, patients aren't benefiting as much either. So that's, again, thank you for those stories. Both of them are very relevant, and again, hit on that point of getting the proper applications training, not just up front, but over the life cycle of that equipment. Okay, I think I have just one more question here. Getting to root cause is becoming like a very popular catchphrase now. Do you have any other? I mean, we talked about Lean and Six Sigma and some of the analytics tools to get insights. What other? Is there any other insights you have or any other suggestions you may have for organizations about how they might get some insights around improving their, people, process, and technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of tools out there. Again, I think you need to understand your organization so you'll be able to understand which of those tools will work for you. I have a colleague that is down in Monterey at CHOMP, the Community Hospital of Monterey Peninsula, and he wanted to focus on patient satisfaction. And so, and actually, if you ever end up doing one of these for related to patient satisfaction, you really should have a conversation with him. His name's Eric Lamonaco, down at Monterey. But what he did was take some, and I'd call it relatively low technology, but he brought in a system that's called Excellence 24/7, and what it did, he and I were having a conversation one time about, patient satisfaction, and when a patient has a bad experience and, you aren't able to solve it there and they've left the building, it's too late to recover that patient. That patient is now gone. They have in their mind what they think of your organization and whatever potential misstep happened. So he instituted using a QR code in all of his waiting rooms, inpatient and outpatient. And if the patient had an issue, they could scan this QR code and have a text conversation with leaders in the imaging department. And what that allowed you to do was to engage with that patient while they're still here and maybe fix their issue, the issue that was happening, and turn around their service. Use the similar technology when scheduling patients. So patients, after they've been scheduled, what if they have a question related to their procedure or the prep for their procedure? There's a number of patients that come in and they didn't follow the prep correctly, and we have to cancel their exam, and now they're gone back and have to reschedule and do the whole thing over. That's inefficient for everybody and is really poor customer satisfaction. If you can address their questions prior to them getting there, you can solve some of these questions. And I think for patient satisfaction, we had good patient satisfaction. He did too, but after he started to institute things like this, he drove it up to, the high 90 percentage for patient satisfaction, and they ended up adopting that kind of organization. Wow. So there's opportunities like that with technology where it can be really helpful and really make meaningful impact.
Yeah, and there's been a lot written about with organizations trying to improve their patient experience. That sounds like a great idea, and to try to improve that situation right in the moment, before they leave the hospital. Because you're right, once someone leaves the hospital then they're going to form an opinion, and they might tell 3 people about a bad experience rather than, a positive experience. It's typically, at least it's how a lot of the times those ratios work, where you tell people a negative experience more so than the positive. So,
well, and that's what people do, right? They'll jump on Facebook and Twitter the moment they have a really bad experience. You don't always get that when you have a really great experience, but you'll always get it when you have a bad experience. So
that's right. That's exactly right. Well, that's a really good insight, and maybe we'll have to have Eric on a future virtual pulse.
Yeah, I think you should. I mean, he's really, really good.
Yeah.
So, and been around the block, as long as I've been. Yeah, he's great. He definitely should have a conversation.
Very good. Yeah, that sounds exciting. Well, Ken, thank you for sharing these insights. I've gathered something here today, and I'm hopeful everyone else in the audience did as well. Lisa, I think we're back over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both. It was a lot of information and a lot of good insights to hear. One question that we did have come in, and I think it's a really good one given the topic of closing the gaps with the people, processes, and technology, and I'm sure it's a pain point because of what we are all starting to hear, and it's been going on for a few months now, of this great resignation, which I'm sure is greatly impacting just everyday processes. I'm sure that there are a lot of gaps that will happen with that. And so, how has that impacted operations with turnover being so high?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. Could be the $1 million question. I think that when you, I think this great resignation, it's basically, and I think, maybe the pandemic has been part of the reason, but I think that, employees have realized that there are many more options out there than maybe previously thought of. So maybe not at acute care or hospital, but maybe, straight outpatient imaging, maybe, other areas of healthcare to leverage their experience. For me, the part of my job that I really loved the most was all of the capital construction projects. So now that's what I want to do. And now I represent owners that are doing these building projects to manage that project for them. So I think there's many more opportunities out there for employees, and I think some of those data analytics and things like that can improve how employees do their job, and makes them want to stay at a place that is making those changes. You have to be cognizant that, like everybody else, like patients and as a customer, employees have other options now as well. So I think it's good and bad. When you have employees resigning at a high rate, that makes operations difficult. And they are, your number one.
It is unfortunate. But kind of to piggyback on that, I mean, what advice would you give even to just employees in that situation to kind of alleviate that frustration from a management perspective? Do you have any, guidance that you would give to your employees for that reason of that kind of understanding?
Yeah, I've always, a couple of things. I would never begrudge any employee to move to a situation that's best for them, right? That's what I'm going to do. That's what Russ is going to do. That's what you'll do, Lisa, right? You're going to make the decision based on what's best for you. So I would never begrudge anybody on those things. If they have something that's working for them and they want to move on to another place, then I think they should. I think what I also did, though, was encourage those employees to bring some ideas and solutions that they think will work and will improve the organization. And I think when you do things like that, good things happen. I think, hospitals, for instance, that have like magnet status. Magnet status is often considered to be like a nursing designation. But in reality, in order to meet magnet status, you have to have a very good interdisciplinary group, hospital that's all on the same page working together. So, when those companies like that get together, it's always an interdisciplinary conversation. Because you'll frequently hear, and I used to hear all the time, well, it's not our fault, it's nursing's fault. It's not our fault, it's transportation's fault. Well, let's get those groups together and work through what those issues are to create a better process. And I think the top-down leadership, I think those days are gone. It's old, and it doesn't work. You need the people that are doing the heavy lifting for you to be part of the solutions.
Yeah, Ken, I like that answer because I think, it's easy to complain. It's a little harder to offer a solution. But I do believe that, and I'm stealing a line that I heard probably 15 years ago, but engaged employees make for engaged customers. So if the employees of the organization can work through that interdisciplinary process, they're going to feel more engaged, and it's going to show to when patients show up, and I think the experience will be different. So in a positive way.
Yeah, I think when you've ever had that conversation with Eric, I think, at first when you put that QR code down for patients to come, employees were a little reticent. They're like, oh, now, I'm going to get this, complaints all the time, and
right.
And they're a little worried about that. But in reality, they're part of the solution that solves the problem for that patient on there. Now you have a grateful patient.
That's right.
Instead of an upset patient. So, it works, and you can't do it without them.
Absolutely. Good questions, Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both again for all the information today. It's been a really great segment. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and wrap up. For everyone that did join today, we certainly appreciate your time. Like I mentioned, there is a resources section. So if you do want to listen in to the last one that we had in February, you can review it there. If you do want to listen to this session again, we will be adding it to our website in the next few weeks. And again, we always do appreciate you completing the survey. It just helps us know how we're doing. And so, again, I certainly appreciate both Ken and Russ's time. And be on the lookout because we will have another segment for the Imaging Virtual Pulse, either late summer or early fall, that we'll be sending you information to register as well. So, again, thank you all for your attendance. Russ, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just like to thank my friend Ken for all his insight, sharing it with our audience today. Thanks a lot, Ken.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you all. Have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.